I finished the DLC for Final Fantasy XVI Echoes of the Fallen after not playing the game since release, and I really wanted to play it pretty badly, but I was really curious as to why nobody was talking about the DLC when I'd heard constantly about the lore of the main story on JRPG Twitter and otherwise. Speaking of which, make sure you follow us on Twitter. But yeah, after playing it, I kind of get it. There's something that really just doesn't sit well with me and kind of doesn't make sense. So I'm gonna share the solace, the good, and the dread, the bad, about this DLC addition to what amounts to one of my favorite games this year. But I won't lie, the bad outweighs the good by a considerable margin. I'm Solace, this is Solace and Dread. We produce analytical content as well as reaction videos primarily focused on Square Enix, Nintendo, and Capcom publications. So let's start with the solace, but before I do, just be aware that we are talking about this DLC in its entirety, so if you don't want to be spoiled, I would strongly advise going and playing the DLC. It only takes a few hours, and then coming back and then sharing your thoughts with me and finishing this video. You've been warned. So the solace, they added a super boss, and Final Fantasy has had super bosses since the first game. Final Fantasy XVI didn't have that. Yeah, it had the harder hunts, but that doesn't really count because, frankly, they weren't very challenging. And that's one of the biggest call-outs about this game, is that it lacked a lot of the challenge that other Final Fantasies have had, regardless of the free action combat. The super boss thing is so ingrained in Final Fantasy, it's wild that we didn't have anything like Omega, who is the boss that's at the end of this fight. And this change definitely does answer to the difficulty problem of the base game. They also added some interesting battle mechanics in the fights that lead up to the final boss of the DLC, and it'll stop you in your tracks if you're not careful. But if I'm being honest, I don't know if the challenge is really because it's that much harder, or if it's because I haven't played the game in so many months, and then I'm diving into difficulty of endgame combat. That was frustrating. I died a number of times, but I feel in my soul that it's because I couldn't remember buttons like how to lock on and, where my moves sat. And, regardless, I died more in this than I did in the base game, and ultimately that's a good thing. For the record, I only died once playing the base game. And the music tracks were great, as is par for the course for Deity Soken. But the song for Omega Weapon is the same from Final Fantasy XIV's fight against Omega Weapon. So the chicken tenders made a comeback and they're ready to fry. This entire fight honestly felt like a nod to Final Fantasy XIV fans, though Final Fantasy V fans as well. Omega now has a theme that should honestly carry on to other Final Fantasy games. I know it's a little off topic here, but Star Ocean has a recurring boss theme for their super boss that carries between the games, and it's amazing. And I think that the song from this, which is Iconoclasm, I think that this is really, really good, and I think this version of this song should carry through to other Final Fantasies in the future where you fight Omega Weapon. Just need to throw that out there. Anyway, as far as the story goes, this is a short side adventure where the gang has a chance encounter with the people who are selling what they come to call dust crystals. These are because these are dusky colored crystals that offer some magical power, but then crumble away after a few uses. So they decide to investigate the source of these crystals, following it back to what you come to find out is the Sage Spire. As it turns out, this tower houses what turns out to be a man-made mother crystal. This was the work of a group called the Fallen, an ancient group of people that manufactured their own mother crystal and hoped to harness enough power to stand up to and kill what eventually becomes the ultimate boss of the game, Ultima. But they were cut down before they were strong enough to take him on. This is an extremely short version of what the DLC is about. The tower's technology, however, is still active and is powered by the Mother Crystal, unlike the technology found in the rest of the game, where it's all ruins and no longer operational. It's much of the same shtick from the base game, though. Mother crystals draw aether from the world and kill it, so it must be destroyed because Clive and his gang are eco-terrorists. Now, if I'm being 100% honest, I did feel like I liked this premise, even if it is all too familiar. Clive having a direct conversation with the people that he's, well, stealing the livelihoods from was refreshing. A lot of times in the base game, Clive would see the effects of not having crystals and how it caused a lot of undue hardships as people had to learn to operate without the blessing of the Mother Crystal. But having a conversation with those people directly benefiting the sales of the crystals and convincing them of why they needed to destroy them was largely missing. But, and this is where we go into the dread, Famiel, the character that represents the people who are being stolen from and benefiting from this Mother Crystal, it felt a little bit like he was too easily convinced that they needed to destroy the heart of their Mother Crystal. Sure, he didn't believe that the crystals were sucking aether out of the earth and causing it to wither, and yeah, he didn't believe Clive, but this was how his people, the descendants of the fallen, made their livelihoods. What, because Clive and two other people saw what was in there, he just all of a sudden feels like everyone is going to find out and come kill them? And while this is probably true, the 180 kind of felt too fast and unearned because there was no time for him to develop. And that brings me to the next thing, the length. This is a $10 side quest that takes about 2 hours. I finished it in 3 hours because I was taking my time and relearning how to fight. I've never played such a short paid DLC campaign, but it was worth the money. Don't misunderstand. It absolutely was worth the money, but it was really short. I had friends who played through it, and because they hadn't yet finished the game and they were still playing through it, it felt like a natural part of the game because of the short runtime. Selling to me what honestly should have been in the base game feels a little gross. As far as that goes though, it's kind of unneeded. Other than the boss fight and the cool mechanics leading up to it, of course, the DLC really just offers insight into the world of Valisthea, showing us the fall of the people that previously rose up to try to fight Ultima, and they possibly could have won had they had time to unleash their Arsenal and Omega weapon on him. But ultimately, it had little to no impact on the story that was being told. And Valisthea is already an extremely fleshed out world. This would have been a great extra dungeon to have in the base game, and it feels kind of odd to sell it to me. Another huge problem, they added an entire new dungeon, and it's still just a linear walking hallway simulator with no puzzles, just more fighting. I don't know why the level design for Final Fantasy XVI insists on being so goddamn awful, but they do. They had every opportunity to make the dungeon more complicated with the technical aspect of having a dungeon that had a living AI controlling the tower. So why not make you have to solve some puzzles to advance or have it not just be a single linear path? But they chose to stick to their guns on this hallway design again. Why? One small complaint that I had is that if you die on Omega Weapon, you should have to start the entire fight over. Currently, if you die, they start you at a checkpoint in the fight and they refill all of your potions. I paid $10 for this fight. Why are you watering it down? Now, I don't know if that same thing persists in Final Fantasy mode, but man, I hope it doesn't. Same goes for any death in the tower. You only lose a few minutes of progress, and that feels kind of cheap. Penalize me for failure, Yoshi P. Anyway, linking it all together, coming back to a game months and months after it released for a 2-hour DLC that had no impact on the plot of the game, and aside from the combat, refuses to learn from the base game's past mistakes is why no one is talking about this, Super Boss or not. It should have been part of the base game. Playing through 100 hours of relatively easy combat and varying intensity of story to come back to this 2-hour adventure just felt kind of strange. And that's what doesn't sit right with me. Why is it so short? It leaves you wanting more though. But again, we'll need to wait until some unknown date in spring when Leviathan's DLC drops. And of course, we'll all forget our buttons all over again. And if it's not substantial enough, that too will be left unmentioned in the conversations, Leviathan or no. That's it from me. Thanks for watching, we'll see you soon, and long live the Turtle Kingdom.